Hey guys, so I'm not making this video with the intent to be edgy or controversial or anything along those lines. It's mostly just to talk about something I've recently been learning more about, because also I can definitely say that in some ways my perspectives about certain things that have to do with this topic have recently changed. And this isn't any way to try to stir anything up. If anybody does get angry in the comments, whatever, or have something to say, I wouldn't be too surprised, because I recently realized that, well, just to stay as a disclaimer to start with, I myself don't claim to be a liberal or a conservative. I have stances and views and perspectives that can line up on each side of the fence. I don't believe that you should be too hard on any side of the fence. I mean, what has it done? Separate people, cause people to harm each other, to attack each other verbally, mentally, and physically. That's not really something I'm looking to do. But I'm not going to make this video about anything that has to do with that. This video, as you can see, is about the Jim Crow laws that I just realized, in our modern time, I don't agree with everything that's going on in the world when it comes to discussions of race. In any direction, there are some things on each side that are a little too extreme and are only doing more harm than good to separate us. But at the same time, what I don't want to do is to try to forget that it was not that long ago that segregation was a fully effective thing, like in our society, and that it was something that a lot of people were totally okay with, 100% stood for, and believed was the way things ought to be. So I saw an article during some of my investigations, as I'll call it, and it had some images and it had little clips that just are reminders that this was something that happened not that long ago. To some people it might feel like it. I just turned 30, and I can definitely say that my life feels like a long time for me. My grandfather, though, is 83, and I can definitely say that he probably has so many more memories and feels like things went by so quickly and yet so long for him. That's enough jibber jabber. I'm going to get into it. So the article that in particular I'm going to be referring to is called "These Horrifying Photos Taken in the Jim Crow South Will Turn Your Stomach" by Jacob Miller for a history collection. Now, of course, that sounds clickbaity, but to be completely honest, it definitely makes you feel something. It definitely makes you think. I'm going to show some of those pictures, and like I said, I'm going to have a little bit to say after it's over with. So, here we go. Ah, yes. Rookie mistake. Before I actually get around to doing that, I'm going to explain to you what the Jim Crow laws were, in case you don't know somehow. The Jim Crow laws were state and local laws that enforced racial segregation in the southern United States. These laws mandated separation between races in all public facilities in the states of the former Confederacy. The laws were put into place alleging separate but equal status for African Americans in public schools, public places such as restrooms, restaurants, and drinking fountains, and public transportation. President Woodrow Wilson, that's a name twister. President Woodrow Wilson initiated the segregation of federal workplaces in 1913. Facilities for African Americans were consistently inferior to those which were available to white Americans. The segregation of public schools was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court of the United States in the 1954 case Brown versus Board of Education. And in some states, it took years to implement the integration, and it was met with severe resistance. So that's exactly what some of these photos and things that we're going to be talking about have to deal with. But now, truly, since I've done this the correct way, let's dive in a little bit. And photo number 1. So the first picture that you just seen says U.S. and Confederate flags fly from a car parked on Tennessee's Capitol Hill in Nashville, where Governor Frank Clement met with a delegation of pro-segregationists on January 24, 1956. Clement turned down a bid to lead a fight for continued racial segregation, saying he did not plan to interfere with local authorities in their decisions on such matters. Now, as you can see, that car has a Confederate flag on it. We all know that even though people argue about what it really represents, we all know that there's a majority of the history of what people who stood for it stood for. But anyway, that was poorly worded, but you know what I'm saying. The car itself says, "Save our children from the Black Plague." And we all know that it's not talking about the sickness, the bubonic plague. They're referring to African Americans. That sucks. But this is from 1956, a couple of years before my dad was born, 1959. And it's amazing to see that, again, it feels like a while ago, but it really wasn't that long ago, was it? That this type of mentality of even saying things like that in public, and people being totally cool with it, or the laws that were in place in the public in general for keeping people apart based off of your race, it's crazy to think that was a thing that feels like forever ago. It's definitely long before I was born. But that's the real world that we lived in that influences things that kind of ended up into the world that we're in today. Now, the next picture is definitely graphic, and I mean, it's not like the most graphic thing ever if you've seen horror movies and such, but it's still not pleasant. But here we go.
So this is freedom writer James Swerg.
Now, if you don't know, freedom riders were civil rights activists who rode interstate buses into the segregated southern United States in 1961 and subsequent years to challenge the non-enforcement of the United States Supreme Court decisions Morgan versus Virginia and Boynton versus Virginia in 1960, which ruled that segregated public buses were unconstitutional. The southern states had ignored the rulings, and the federal government did nothing to enforce them. The first Freedom Ride left Washington, D.C. on May 4th, 1961. May 4th, that's my birthday, and was scheduled to arrive in New Orleans on May 17th. But this graphic image that we just saw was, as I said, Freedom Rider James Swerg, sorry, I've been studying German recently, stands bleeding after an attack by white pro-segregationalists at the Greyhound bus terminal in Montgomery, Alabama on May 20th, 1961. Swerg remained on the street for over an hour after the beating since the white ambulances refused to treat him. Again, just to understand, this is 1961 in Alabama, and the white ambulances refused to treat someone who had been beaten for what he was standing for. It's not that long ago. And by the way, just to clarify again, this isn't some type of like trying to incite white guilt type of video. Again, I don't believe that modern people like myself, who I can say for sure, this isn't like trying to, oh, look at me, but I can say for sure that like I know that my great-grandparents on both sides of my family, actually, oddly enough, being from rural North Carolina, little towns like Goldsboro and Hillsboro, I actually know these were people who supported and were always supported African-American cultures and other cultures and stuff, and were always somehow or another just like the type of religion that they were, the type of Christianity they were, and the type of environments they were in, somehow were not for or completely against the segregation, and were actually friends with people of different cultures and races and stuff, even back in the 40s and such. But with that being said, regardless, even for people whose families were involved with things like in history and stuff, I don't believe anybody in modern times who had nothing to do with it and do not see things the way that their ancestors did should have to feel guilty or crappy for something that you had nothing to do with personally. On the other hand, I do believe that I've been learning a lot lately about more how to construct my perspectives on what I think is still happening to people in today's time. But again, we'll touch on that at the end of this. We're going to go through more of these just to show some more examples, like I said, of things that happened not that very long ago. Because I think that there are a lot of people who are trying to say that no such thing as like any form of systemic racism exists at all, because they try to make certain type of examples again that we'll touch on a little bit later. But there are things that have affected the way races and classes are set up in society, and they weren't, like I said, they were not that long ago. Again, let's dive back into it. We'll get more into it later. I don't want to bore you guys, drive you crazy.
Now this wonderful human being is a Mr. Benny Oliver.
Now, Benny Oliver, it says, a former Jackson, Mississippi police officer viciously kicks Memphis Norman, a black student who was waiting to be served at a segregated lunch counter. The rumor of possible civil rights actions in town caused onlookers to cheer the beating. Again, this is a terrible thing. This is a terrible moment to have happened. And yet, these people stood around cheering as somebody was being beaten, potentially to death. It doesn't say here that the person died, that, what was his name? Memphis Norman. It doesn't say that this person passed away, but he was being kicked and beaten and abused by this retired officer or what have you, just for his race and out of fear of what that kid might be there for, or that other people in general involved with his race were inciting things that were completely, deserving. The human rights were completely deserved to everybody for equal freedoms. But these people didn't feel that way. And it's just like I said, it's crazy to think that this just basically happened on the cuff of history. Because a lot of times, like for instance, if you're a religious person, if you're a Muslim, or if you are, let's be more specific, like if you're a Christian, for instance, you believe in Jesus, or that Jesus is God, depending on what denomination you are. Not to be really to bring this stuff in or anything, but you also believe that Jesus was from around 2,000 years ago. Okay, in reality, even in the bulk of history, that's not even that long ago. Ancient Greece, we're talking around 1000 BC or even 500 BC. These are times that are not that long ago in the length of how long the Earth has existed or humanity has existed. But I'm not going to get too much of all that. The point is, 1960s, 1950s, dude, that's nothing. But again, let's keep moving on. I'm sorry I get so distracted.
Of course, here we have another little sad moment in time.
Now in this photo, Johnny Gray, 15 years old, punches a white student during a scuffle in Little Rock, Arkansas on June 16th, 1958. Johnny and his sister Mary, standing behind him in the photo, were en route to their segregated school when the two white boys in the photo ordered them to get off the sidewalk. They were just walking, minding their own business, trying to get to school, to their segregated school. They weren't trying to upturn anything, and two kids just couldn't let them exist. Can you imagine a world where you're walking down the street and you have to be concerned that people will come up and approach you and bother you simply because of your skin color that you can do nothing about? This isn't about things like, I have tattoos. I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to equate myself with how I look and the things I've been through to people of different race. I mean, it does sound that way, but just pay attention. I'm sorry. My tattoos have caused people, even recently in some of my comments on here, to dump on me because I've defiled my body, as they feel based off of their particular interpretations of their belief systems. But when I walk out and about, if I go certain places in the world, or for instance, a place that we really look forward to going, Japan, there's a lot of people in Japan who are uncomfortable with the way people like me look when you have tattoos like I do. They can be afraid because of a cultural thing. But it's still going to feel awkward for me. Or I have also been in situations where I have been attacked, like verbally attacked by people just walking on the street because of how I look, and they disagree with it. But I couldn't imagine, like I did this to myself. I couldn't imagine being born and my skin color alone in the world that I live in. I have to learn from a young age and then all the way through that I'm growing up. But as I'm just walking down the street, somebody might want to fight me or attack me or stir something up or tell me where I can and can't stand or be just because of my skin. Again, it's just a crazy thing to think about, isn't it?
Oh, hey, how nice of them to help this young man.
Now, we all know Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This picture says police officers O.M. Strickland and J.V. Johnson apply force in arresting Martin Luther King Jr. for loitering near a courtroom where one of his integration lieutenants was on the stand on September 4th, 1958. King claimed that he was beaten and choked by the arresting officers while the police denied the charges. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say this right now. I'm not a defund the police person or all cops are bad type of thing. First and foremost, in the city that I live in, the majority of the police officers are African American and Hispanic. Literally almost all of them. But with that being said, that even has nothing to do with anything about an officer being able to do their duty. Any officer of any race can be a racial profiler. But one thing I do know is I have had a lot of friends myself who have been in the police force, and the reason of different races and different creeds, the reason why they're there is to do some type of good if they can for their community. I think it's definitely silly to think that we should be completely against police officers because, not to be silly or to say something that a lot of people might laugh at, but they are going to be who you're probably going to call in a lot of situations where certain serious skirmishes or things happen in your life. But even aside from that, while we do need some type of order and some type of structure in society and such, and having some forces that could be doing good for those things, we do know that there is a lot of bad. It also comes, there are racist people who are working in the police forces, just like in the military or any other workplace. So, but people who are the authorities have authority. And if there are bad eggs in the bunch, they're going to be able to do things that can cause people to be completely against the whole. It's unfortunate, but we do that. We generalize people. It happens all the time. If there's one person or certain groups of people, even subgroups of people in a big organization of some kind, or even from certain cultures, or even races and stuff, people have a way of just taking things and going way above and beyond and thinking that the whole group they generalize is bad. But again, that's too much to get into. I'm not going to even touch on all the nuances here or make every case that I should. Regardless, the point is here is this is a case where police officers were doing something I think a lot of us today would definitely disagree with in the way they were treating him and handling him. And I think even though this again says King claimed that this happened to him and they didn't, they denied it, I think we're probably safe to assume it really did happen and he didn't just make it up. Because unfortunately back then, what would it have gotten him? Sympathy from his own people, but it wouldn't have gotten him sympathy from people at large. It certainly wouldn't have done him any good because obviously it didn't. The officers weren't, prosecuted or anything like that. But let's move forward. Also, just another disclaimer, in any of my videos, if you ever actually take the time to watch them, the things that I say that are my own personal perspectives, opinions, or beliefs about stuff, it's just my current interpretations. I like to believe that we should all be willing to consider that we might be wrong or need to at least be continually trying to learn and grow in our perspectives. critical thinking. One of the biggest reasons we have problems these days is that's a skill most people don't have any at all going on within themselves, and they don't try to apply the ability to grow that skill. But that's how we make progress. To learn to examine and analyze things that we already think and see, are these working out? Are these for the better of people around us? Do we care if they are? And how can we make them better if they are not adequate right now? But with that being said, my personal perspectives and opinions that I put in my videos, I don't expect anyone to necessarily agree or care about them. That's not the whole point of the video, but I just have a habit of throwing those things out there. This is my channel, I'm able to do that. But I mean no offense to anyone, and I'm not here trying to argue with anyone, because I think if there's one thing people can notice, doing big arguments or debates don't really benefit people other than just making a measuring contest about what I believe, what you believe, and not getting anywhere at the end of the day. Having a nice discussion and being willing to even hear what the other person has to say and potentially considering they might have a point. I might just want to see why they believe what they believe or how they came to those conclusions. Now that can get us somewhere. Anyways, sorry about all this again. This is just how my channel is. Let's get into the next part.
Now this one's just too sad to say anything stupid over.
Now in this it says, police examined the wreckage of the newly disintegrated, the newly dead, well, same thing, but same situation going on here, but desegregated Haiti Cotton Grammar School, which was dynamited, an interesting word to choose, but it is the way it happened, I guess, dynamited in Nashville, Tennessee on September 10th, 1957. The entire east wall and 4 classrooms were demolished. The attack occurred after a single 6-year-old black child was admitted at this school to the 1st grade. I mean, it speaks for itself. I don't really have to do any type of over explaining in these photos or what have you for the horrible things that were going on and the reasons why they happened to, I'd like to believe that most people watching this can see these things are awful. But, let's move on to the next thing and I'll just let you think about that.
Now look at this bunch of fine young citizens right here.
So in this photo, you see one person's sign says, "Save segregation, vote state rights." But at the bottom it says, "Women and teenagers at William Franz Elementary School yell at police officers during a protest against the desegregation of the school." As 3 black youngsters attended classes at the school for the 2nd day, on November 15th, 1960, the sign on the far right reads, "All I want for Christmas is a clean white school." Once again, it speaks for itself. Moving on.
Oh, how precious. Isn't that cute?
Now this photo is really sad. I mean, again, speak for itself, but this photo is really sad just because there's a little child who is being brought up to believe what you see they obviously believe. But this was from 1956, again a couple years before my dad was born. Southern whites are the Negro's best friends, but no integration. It's just genius, isn't it? Everything that they had to say in that little sign that's nice and summed up into, we got all the answers. It says a 7-year-old child, 7 years old, in Ku Klux Klansman robes participates in a KKK rally April 14th, 1956. Again, good stuff, right?
Oh yeah, you tell him, kid. Nice belt.
But as you see by the photo that we just saw, it gets even better. A group of young white boys harassed the Baker family, the first black family to move into the all-white Delmar Village neighborhood of Fulcroft, Pennsylvania in 1963. This is another one of those situations where I'm pretty sure that there are people out there to this day who would go on a nice little stretch to say, well, what did the family expect? I mean, look where they were moving. It was an all-white neighborhood. It's amazing though, right? It's amazing that there ever was all-white neighborhoods. Again, just tossing my own viewpoints and opinions out there. It's crazy for me to think that when I was actually a child, until we moved out in the country in a really nice, beautiful place called Snow Camp, North Carolina. I was born in Burlington, North Carolina. The elementary school that I went to was actually legitimately almost completely perfectly spread of each different race almost to the T of the population. Sorry, I couldn't remember the word for a second. So I literally at one point in time was even in a minority as far as the races that were in the school. And I never knew any different from the time I was a little baby. I didn't know any different of I knew we looked different, but we were all humans, and there was no reason for me to see that there was a strangeness for that a kid would be a black kid or a Spanish kid, a brown kid of some kind. Could be Middle Eastern, could be Egyptian, could be anything. It could be an Asian kid of somebody from somewhere. I don't know. It didn't really, all I wanted to do was ask them questions about their lives, ask them about their cultures and stuff, and learn more. It was always a part of my life. So for me to imagine what it would have been like to actually live in a world where, like, I live in a neighborhood where it's just all white people, but then even better, I go out in the city and it's primarily white people, and then when there are black people or any other race, they have to go to a completely different place to eat, to use the bathroom, to drink water. We'll get to that again, but it's just so crazy to imagine what that would have actually been like to live in that world. And I know that if you were born and raised in that era, in any era in history, you would not really know the difference because you're raised around, well, you're raised in the environment, so it's just kind of what you're exposed to. How could you possibly know the difference? But it's interesting to think, outside of nature versus nurture being like taught that this is how things are supposed to be, that there are people who were able to just know better. I think that this is just my opinion. I know this doesn't mean anything, but I think that a lot of people, kind of like how when people who are who often don't like getting caught, or nobody likes getting caught doing something, caught in a lie, or caught doing something you're not supposed to. But we see when people do get caught doing things, there are a lot of people who either fess up and say, you know what, you're right, they have integrity. Then there's people who get really upset and angry and they attack back. They make things way blown out of proportion. I think that there were a lot of people who knew deep down that what they were doing or what they were participating in was wrong, but they would become so explosively vigilant about it or aggressive because deep down somewhere they knew it was wrong, but this was just part of the culture. Or maybe even in certain situations we know people with different belief systems do extreme things because it's just what they feel they have to do to belong. It's possible. But either way, let's keep moving. These, again, just my opinions, guys.
So as you can see here, we have a school.
Now look at the state of this classroom. It says, a teacher instructs a segregated class of black students at a poorly funded one-room school in the backwoods of Georgia in 1941. Can you look at it? Can you imagine if that was the school that you went to? Again, it speaks for itself. Let's keep moving.
Phew-wee! Now this is the doozy.
Now this one is just a peach, isn't it? Boy, oh boy, if this guy, I bet he was really proud of himself. But not being sarcastic, he really was proud of himself. You can see it in front of everybody. He's just having a good old time. It says, an unidentified white student slugs an effigy of a hanging black student outside Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas on October 3rd, 1957, as nearly 75 students of the school walked out to protest integration. They were just really having a time with all this, weren't they?
Another happy photo to brighten your day, huh?
Here's something that a lot of people should be familiar with. Black citizens sit in the rear of the bus in compliance with the South Carolina segregation law in April 1956. Fun stuff.
Look at these three handsome boys right here.
Oh, look, it gets even funner, doesn't it? Here we have Buddy Trammell, Max Stiles, and Tommy Sanders. I don't know them. You don't know them. But somehow we have their names. Students of Clinton High School in Clinton, Tennessee, picket their school when it becomes the first state-supported school to integrate on August 27th, 1956. One of the signs says, "We won't go to school with Negroes. Strike against integration." Again, these were just young boys. We can be sarcastic and make fun of these situations, but we have to be honest here. These were just young men who didn't know any better. Like I said, you'd like to believe that somewhere inside of them they did. But unfortunately, this was how they were raised. These were the things they were hearing at home. It's really sad, but this is the life that they were living, which leads us to the next picture.
No words are obviously necessary for this.
This is definitely very sad. This is counter-protesting against civil rights demonstrations. Edward R. Fields and James Murray, which, not to be funny, but it's really sad that that's that guy's name, because I don't know if anybody here likes to show Impractical Jokers, but Murr is one of my favorite characters, and that happens to be his name anyway. Edward R. Fields and James Murray, members of the National State Rights Party, hang an effigy of Martin Luther King Jr. outside the party's headquarters in Birmingham, Alabama on May 6, 1963. Again, when you just look at the picture, it really is. It's crazy to think this is the way that the world once was. Moving on.
The world's dumbest parade in history.
Here we have more people celebrating. Demonstrators outside of West End High School in Birmingham, Alabama sing songs and cheer during an anti-desegregation protest on September 10th, 1963.
The moment you've all been waiting for.
I wonder if the 7-year-old's here, you never know. But this is the big humdinger. Klansmen form a circle around a burning cross at a rally in Albany, Georgia, which an estimated 3,000 persons attended in 1962. 3,000 people! I don't know what the population was in this city at the time, but can you imagine that? Well, I mean, of course, it's possible people were coming from other places, but 3,000 people were there to support this. It's so wild. Like I said, the truth of understanding this is just the culture of the time, but it doesn't excuse it. After like the long length of history that we had, the long existence of humankind, dating back to our ancestors and such, to think that this is where we were just in that period of time, not very long back. It's crazy. And it gets even better. Reverend Ralph Abernathy and Reverend Wyatt T. Walker inspect the wreckage of the Negro Shady Grove Baptist Church in Leesburg, Georgia, after the structure was demolished in a fire believed touched off by an explosion on August 15, 1962. People just couldn't help themselves, I guess.
Would you just look at that?
And speaking of not being able to help themselves, civil rights activists trying to stage a protest are blocked by National Guardsmen brandishing bayonets on Beale Street, Memphis, Tennessee, 1968. This one isn't violent, but it makes me sad more than a lot of the rest of them. A family drinking at a colored drinking fountain in Alabama. It's crazy to think the fountains are right next to each other. I can't tell for sure, but based off the little girl's height in between, we're talking maybe about 2 feet, maybe 2 feet. And this is wild, maybe less. It's wild to think that that's literally something these little kids had to walk up to and wonder, what difference does it make? This is the world that we lived in. It's so crazy, isn't it? It's so crazy to think that 2 drinking fountains side by side, the way they went out above and beyond just to do, think of the water bill. Sorry, I'm not trying to be too funny. I'm not trying to make light. I'm definitely not making light of these eras and the things that were going on. I crack jokes. Humor is a way for me to just try to segue things. That's just the type of person I am. I guess in a way I do like trying to make light of things for the sake of getting a point across. But these are serious situations. And it's really sad to think that this is what people went through. There are so many more photos that I could show. There were many more photos that were a part of this actual article. But to be completely honest with you, I think I've shown enough. I think that they all pretty much speak for themselves as much as you could possibly hope for them to do. But now I'm going to talk just a little bit. Well, I've already done enough of that, so I'm going to talk a lot of it. Who knows? So I'm actually not going to try to drag this out too much longer. But it's just, I think I've said actually throughout this video and throughout in between each of these individual pictures pretty much what I needed to say. But it's crazy for me because, like I said, I don't believe that we should be trying to make people who had nothing to do with this feel a present sense of guilt. But I will say, to touch on my own perspective that's kind of shifted, and if anybody takes offense towards my old perspective, I'm sorry. For a while, again, growing up around predominantly people of other cultures and other races and stuff to a certain age until I was like 13 and such, and then moving back into places where that was the case again around the ages of 15 all the way up to 21 or so, I mostly always knew the norms of just being around other people of different races and different cultures. I have met people from third world countries who I became close with, who were able to, through dedication, perseverance and such, wonderful concepts, but doesn't happen for not so easy for everybody to just have the ability to go through, or even the right circumstances to fall into their lap, even with those driving forces. But people who are able to pull themselves away from the places that they were from, or not even just third world countries, but like rough places to come up from, not the most, more impoverished nations and places. I have known people, and also so you can see many stories online and stuff. You've always been able to do. There's books about it, inspirational stories of people who managed to overcome the circumstances that they come from to rise up and move to another place or lands that have some better opportunity than the ones that they come from originally, and to take advantage of those opportunities and to grow themselves, not just to like even a moderate level, but to even grow themselves to great wealth, some people have, to great careers, and to be able to take that back to where they're from and do great things for the community that they grew up in or that they come from. That happens. So when you hear things like that, it can influence a person to start taking a stance, and it did for me, that a large portion, that perhaps there's not as much systemic racism as some people believe. I know there's definitely not as much imposition against your opportunity to the extreme that some extremists think there is. But there definitely does exist historical things that aren't from that long ago that in many enterprises, companies, corporations, and even different agencies that still breeds depending on where you are in the country, where you are in population and stuff like that, who's the majority, who's the minority in certain territories and stuff like that. You can definitely see that those things do exist, but for me, I thought that they really weren't very much imposing on people of today's time. I know that even in my own city, like I said, there's a huge supporting culture for black-owned businesses and people of other ethnically inclined cultures. I know that there are huge support systems and big communities for you see people thriving from different races and such. So when I see that, it's easy for me to put. I initially come from a really small town, and then when I moved to bigger towns, bigger cities, and I'm seeing all this, it's hard for me to think, well, how hard could it really be at the end of the day? That's the thought that I was having. It's like, if there's so many people I see, like black business owners, actually, like in the cities that I have lived in and currently live in, there seems to be more black-owned businesses than potentially not. It's hard for me to think, if these people are succeeding and thriving and stuff. And when I say these people, I just mean, well, you get what I mean, honestly. To be completely honest with you, I see people of different cultures and stuff able to succeed and stuff. Don't take anything like racially offensive by that. So I think, well, how opposed could things really be? Are we making a bigger deal out of things? Are we letting conservative and liberal media make us come against each other and divide harsher depending on what you stand for? Like if you're a conservative, you're obviously the enemy to these people. If you're a Democrat, or a liberal, you're an enemy to these people. And there's no way that we could possibly have communications and meet in the middle and stuff like that. But especially when it comes to topics like race or sexuality and things like that. But with me saying all that, I realized after really thinking about it that I was a little too lax on what I saw was opposed to people, to think that people are really against themselves. Like when I ride through places that are like 20 minutes from where I live, they're more impoverished, more ghetto, as people would call it. I realized that the thoughts I had for a long time, that these people are all here because they're just doing it to themselves. To some small percentage, there is a factor of a cycle that every person has the chance to get out of if they had the ability to recognize that and to take the drive to push for it. Because there are people who've done it. There are people who came out of the worst of slums because they just did not want to keep this being their life anymore and overcome anything that was oppositional to them. But does that change the fact, does it mean, I guess if I can give a better example and not to just ramble too much, we all know that how you were raised, for instance, and the things that are instilled on you, just like those people who were racist back in time that we saw here, a lot of that comes from what they were taught to believe and the environments they grew up in. So I was able to really think about it and recognize that just because I can say, as somebody who had different privileges in my life, I went through some harsh things myself that I had to overcome, but I had more privileges than somebody who was born and raised in like a really run-down slum or a ghetto environment or something, or a third world country, for instance. So I had opportunities and advantages and things at my disposal that a lot of these people don't even believe are possible because they're raised to believe that. And how can you, just like how you're taught, sorry, disclaimer, I'm about to say something to anybody who doesn't know that Santa's not real. But just like how you're raised to believe in certain cultures and stuff that Santa Claus exists. And then you really believe it because it's what your parents teach you. You have no reason not to believe it. Why would you not believe it? It's what they've convinced you of. But then you find out this whole time it hasn't been true. But you had to learn that by somebody telling it to you. You will fight kids at school if they try to convince you otherwise. This is just believing in a fictional being like Santa Claus. But imagine you do grow up. I thought about it. Imagine you do grow up in an environment where you are convinced that this is the best you'll ever get. This is the lifestyle and environment you have to live, and that there are systems in place and things that are oppressing you, and you don't have many opportunities at all, if any. to overcome this. So you might as well just fall back into the system. This is your dad and your granddad and your great-granddad, your grandmother, whoever we're a part of. So whether it's drug dealing, gang violence, all kinds of other things, it really depends. All type of stuff. There are stereotypes that people think of as a ghetto situation. For me, like I said, it hit me a lot to realize that, like, I guess, like I said, my perspective that there's more opportunity there, you're just not seeing it. There's some truth to that, but the thought that, well, why don't they just do it, or why shouldn't we just teach people? There's also the understanding of recognizing there has to be a sympathy that there is real things in opposition, including a system, that system wouldn't exist. I guess that's the thing I've been wording poorly. I realized that system would not exist in place, that these people in these environments would continue these vicious cycles that people on the conservative side so often crap on, or like, you see, look at them, they're doing this to themselves. They wouldn't even be in these cycles if these things that we just looked at didn't happen, hadn't been against them, even not that long ago. Because it wasn't that long ago that all these things were in place. Segregation and pushing people to the bottom of the barrel, to the lower end, in the most rundown regions of towns. I think that a lot of rundown areas of certain cities that exist now were always like that. They're just the brought down ancestors of people who are already growing up in these places, poorly funded areas of cities and such, rundown and poorly funded locations for people to grow up in. And even the schools in those locations, I think, reflect that this is not something that's still happening because they don't care, or that they're not taking advantage of the opportunities for them. They don't have even all the opportunities that some people might think they do. And even if they did, sometimes people are not even aware of it, or even recognize that they should care, because they don't know any better. And again, I'm sure there's a lot of things I said that people could take out of context or have a problem with, but I just wanted to say that I spent some time realizing that my perspectives were wrong, and that they need to continue to be worked on. That there is a cycle that's put in place by something that's out of people's hands, and it happens in many different cultures and environments all over the world, but especially here in America. And perhaps if you've listened to anything I've had to say here, even if you thought I was just randomly rambling, or that I didn't word this well enough, I don't script my videos. I probably shouldn't, starting in the future. Right now, I don't make any money making this channel. If you see, I don't even, potentially, maybe one day I will by the time you're watching this, but right now I don't even have 1,000 subscribers. Like, I'm making these videos because I like making videos. I like talking about things that I'm thinking about, and sharing things with people, because maybe somehow, just like I've learned things from people I look up to, maybe somehow I can say something that'll make someone, just even one person, think a little bit more about a particular subject out there. But I just wanted to try to talk about this, like I said, to maybe inspire somebody to get a different perspective. That's all. That's the best I can give you. So I hope that if you watch this, you maybe got something from it. Or even if you didn't, I hope that you recognize that people can change. I wasn't a racist or anything like that, so I guess it's not as miraculous of a video of being like, look at me, I used to be this, and now I'm not. But I did believe that people didn't have as much opposing them or against them as I can see that they really do. Even if, and also where these things even started. It's hard to say people should just change the way things are now, when it comes from a history that's not that long ago and was for so long prior, opposing them and against them, pushing people into regions and places and environments where these things would even happen in the first place. So, again, I hope I made some kind of sense. I might have failed at this video. If I did, I'm sorry. But thank you for watching. If you did get anything out of this video, I'm going to continue to make videos going forwards without being too afraid anymore about how people feel about the subjects and stuff like that. Because this is just me being me. This channel is a lifestyle channel where me and my lady will talk about all kinds of stuff. As you can see by part of the title of this video, I'm going to be doing these little video vlogcasts or vlogs that I'm going to be called I Can't Believe This Happened. And, you know, like I said, I hope that you enjoy it, and if you want to continue to watch things as we get better and get better quality stuff or what have you, please check it out. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, comment on this video and tell me what you think. Comment if you won't have any input and you would just like to discuss. And if you want to, also, you can follow on Instagram or whatever. You can even find me on Facebook, Andrew Douglas Lane, and we can communicate a little bit. But I'm Andrew. This is the Moon Huggy channel, and we're from Durham, North Carolina. I send nothing but love to you guys, and I hope that, like I said, I hope you enjoyed.